Let's begin. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to invite you to the panel discussion. Cybersecurity in the payment technologies. We're looking at different digital services, the speed of it, and how comfortable it is. The most important for us is the security at the moment. The payment, security in the payment. They will not be in demand by the customers unless they're safe and secure. And that's what we'll be discussing about. Allow me to introduce the participants from the right to from me. Troyanovsky Vladimir, NSPK, next Antonov, Ministry of Digital Development, and the last one, Sergey, with another bank. The services that are in great demand, whether it's QR payment or biometric payment, and we try to follow the trends, as part of the central bank, and which is trying to secure that things are safe, and how to use the QR codes, and how to check the threats level. Let's start with the infrastructure of the payment. What are the trends in terms of the security of the payment? Good morning. Thanks for the question. If you noticed already, here at the forum, there are a lot of time that was given to the security issues. How to keep the balance in terms of the comfort of payment and the security of payment. And Komlev, during his presentation, he also touched on this subject. From the perspective of technology, I believe that in our country, things are safe. And better, actually, comparing to other countries. The security aspect is sort of like it's a cake with different levels. It all starts with an infrastructure, and then it goes up to the operating system, all the applied levels and things that are used. So everything has to do with this sort of cake. It's hard to penetrate it. And I do know that at the moment there are not so many attacks, cyber attacks, whether it's on the market or in our community. There are not a lot of attacks that will lead to sort of like stealing the actual money. It is much easier for it to be done if a customer is attacked, not the platform. And almost every day you see that, whether it's government staff that using the social engineering, the money are being stolen. About a month ago, there was an example. We are at some meeting, and my colleague is next to me, and someone called him. He hung up, and then he finally replied. Someone is telling him something on his phone, and then he starts replying. My colleague is replying to the caller. He's giving him the details of the SMS that he got. And he's explaining to me that someone is asking for certain information about Gosuslugi, the state services. I'm trying to stop him because I'm trying to tell him these are the scammers. And later I tried to explain to him, and he's not just a regular guy. He was in a setting, at a work setting, where he was just too busy to think, and he was forced, or he was under pressure to actually give his private information. Of course, he felt pressure. That's why he gave it. But it happens. It happens all the time that even some of the information get leaked. So, I mean, a previous session we were talking about the education in general. I believe it is important. It is important to share with the people, to raise awareness, this sort of financial literacy, but not just the literacy, but the way you behave with certain digital services that we use. I mean, how to use them properly. And if one, let's say this camera uses this or that sort of service trying to get your information, I mean, it is a real threat that does exist no matter where you are. And then again, I mean, one of the ways to prevent it is biometrics. I mean, and that's one of the things that central bank is sort of like also dealing and trying to share with the public, and it's one of them is a biometric payment with fast payment service. And I think simplifying the technologies, simplification of the technologies is one of the trends for the nearest future. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what you said about the financial literacy is a crucial one. I mean, we give a lot of attention to it, but there's more and more needed. I mean, we believe, yeah, it's not just a matter of lack of knowledge. You must have the skill to use them. So that the control of your, whether it's your personal, financial, or any other data, it should be installed in the society. And of course, it's not just a matter of a person being educated about it, but it's also our responsibility from the service and technological field that we need to provide that kind of security. And if it happens, if someone is under the threat of a cyber scammer, there are certain steps, security steps, that should be in place in order to prevent the financial transactions. So, I mean, when we talked about the security of the digital payment, so the question to VTB, I mean, you were using different marketplaces, and how were you able to provide the security for that? And it will be great if you could share any of that. Thank you for the question. I think as our bank, VTB, I'm sorry, we were one of the first banks that got under the sanctions, and all the beauty, I mean, quote unquote, of the sanctions, we had to face them. So in a way, you know, our bank, we were the pioneers of how to deal and work under the sanctions. I mean, what happened as the sanctions came in? I mean, some of our applications were no longer available in Apple stores or Google stores, and we had to deal with that. And find the ways around it. So for the first 4 months of the last year, the users of our applications increased by 4 times. Actually, I mean, the app itself of our bank's app, I mean, is quite useful and convenient to use. Actually, so we saw the increase of the users. Together with other colleagues and other banks, we tried to sort of like find the way to sort of surpass this sanctions list, and how to, we were changing the names of applications and whatnot. It was not effective, to be honest. And the last time, I mean, when we were trying to upload one of our apps, I mean, it took us quite a while. And after having spent several weeks, we just found that it was blocked again. So it's certain things that's the reality of life now. So, I mean, some of the things that we have in our operating system, there are, I mean, through web, they are still working properly, and it was also quite convenient for the users to use. I mean, using as in the web resources that we provide to our customers. So currently the VTB online works properly. There is no issue comparing to other platforms. That's just one of the ways to go. And I think it's just one of those things that we need to remember for the future. It does not require any memory on your personal gadget or anything like that. It is updated regularly, being web-based. So these days, I mean, for example, with our Android app that you can download from the Russian stores, is still kept up to date, and we were keeping our user space on the same level that we had before the sanctions. From the security perspective, as we're talking about it right now, whenever we use the app, of course, you need to authenticate the person, and must be whether it has two-facet authentication, whether it's a web or phone application. You use the face, you use the code to authenticate yourself. When we were using sort of like our apps under different names, we found that some of the scammers were coming up with their own apps using using the name of our bank. And so some of the fake apps were available, and they were able to download some of the personal data, whether it was they were able to download that personal data as well. So using the web interface, the web-based services, Face and Touch ID at the moment, push notifications, using the QR code to pay, and there is no issue with that. All of that works, and our clients are happy with that. So our sort of answer to that issue is using providing the web solutions for the customers. We believe that it has good potential for the future to be used as well. Yeah, I believe your experience can be useful for that, or whether it's something that could be used now or later. So just small addition. You said about advantages. So you don't need to download the app. You can use the web interface. But what are the disadvantages? I mean, there are certain functions that maybe have not been available on the web interface, but currently we do have them. So, and it also has to be sort of considered that not all browsers maybe support all of the functions that we do have. But one thing I want to share from the security's perspective and the independence of usage of our apps, and speaking what is already available. There are certain Russian services and applications like the fast payment service. I mean, that's a new product, and that is independent from our friends from the West, and not all of those are friends to us. So we do have to come up with new things. Thank you. Yeah, we will be testing your products. So the characteristic of modern technologies, one of them is the remote access, and we use it all the time. And of course, the remote authentication is very crucial. And in the Bank of Russia, it is something we understand, and we need to use it. But we got to find our own approaches to how to use it. But among us, there are some colleagues who are actually sort of like produce those kind of instruments and products almost, you could say, manually. I mean, they're the ones who come up with it. So the question is to Anton, who's one of those people, how to find the balance, and how did you find a solution in your own work?
No.
Thank you for the question. Indeed, the task is a challenge. And it's not always, it's just about convenience and security. The configuration is much more difficult. In some cases, the simplicity for the user can also increase the overall safety. So the less mistakes a user can make, the less actions they need to do, the less probable that they can also make some mistakes and do something not correctly. If we talk about the application, the state key, which is one of the tools of cybersecurity, we also assess all this in accordance with the requirements that are set. And so the question of authentication, in fact, is as follows. When an onboarding happened, when a user is in the application for not the first, but for the second and third time, then we use a cryptographic mechanism. So we have a key pair, we have the two-side certificate according to the state standard, and this is the most secure mechanism. But actually, to come to that end, when a user has all the tools, we need to do the onboarding. This is not only about the certificate for the key pair here, but also this is to register the sample, the origin of the cryptographic information, and here we also need to use a TLS according to the state standard. And when it comes to mobile platforms, this is not an easy task when it comes to TLS according to the state standard. So then we need to issue the security certificate, also non-qualified signature. And after all these steps, one can establish this trust in the web, and one can use the service securely. So all these steps are difficult, and we really wanted to minimize their number. So the minimum that is required in accordance with the legislation and the normative documents, we put these minimum requirements and translate them into 4 to 5 steps. And then we work in a secure mode with the use of the full-fledged two-side crypto protection. And so there could also be an additional step, which is about the qualified certificate and remote mechanisms in accordance with the federal law 6.3. One can use a foreign passport or a biometric system to that end. And so these mechanisms also require some complicated interaction between systems, and these are specific steps that are needed. And some of them require the qualified signature. So the general approach is as follows. When we talk about some mass solutions, cryptographic ones that respect the requirements of the regulator, the algorithm is the less expertise is required from a user, the better. At the same time, we shouldn't really think for our user instead of our user, because they also have responsibility. So a document that is for a user, it should be available to a user, and they should be able to read it and then make a choice. Maybe even more simplification could ease some processes as well, but there is legislation and there are some requirements. That's the approach of ours. Okay, thank you very much. So you actually just demonstrated that the simplicity and security are not enemies here. Those are not antagonists. They can work together. So the main idea is that we shouldn't be just thinking standardly and we shouldn't assume that everything that is secure it's very complicated. I think that this idea should be indeed highlighted, and I guess that's the main idea of your speech. So you work with the security issues in practice. Now let's ask the state representative. Let's ask the representative of the Ministry of Digital Development. How do you see the process of authentication? I know that you have a lot of initiatives such as QR codes and two-factor authentication. Could you maybe elaborate on the initiatives and what should banks expect in the nearest future? Okay, how else can we surprise you, right? Okay, good. I do agree with the saying that not everything that is secure is very much complicated. I will also share my position. Just recently, on the state services, Gosuslugi, we've added two-factor authentication. So the government has issued the order, it was adopted, and we introduced this two-factor procedure. It's a step-by-step procedure. We're still onboarding our users. There are three options: SMS, a short text message, or biometrics. And there were a lot of discussions and reports on the TV, the articles in the internet, the experts from the market, and we were explaining all this. And so we got a question: what does one need to do to protect the account on state services? Okay, so two-factor authentication, is this the guarantee of security? The answer is no. Why? Why do we need that if it's not a guarantee? Well, because there's always a risk that a user can actually just transfer this information further. The first speaker already told a story about an SMS that was shared with a fraudster, and here we see the same story. Okay, so what shall we do to provide for the security of our profile, of our account on state services? We say, yes, okay, so you can activate this two-factor authentication, but please don't tell anybody the SMS or some short code that comes on your smartphone. And when it comes to biometrics, it's a bit more complicated because, well, if you got your smartphone stolen, then well, obviously, nobody could use your face. And that means that a lot of people are now using the biometrics option. So biometrics is a complex thing, at least it seems to be such, because we need to submit it, the biometrics data, we need to do some steps. But at the same time, when we explain to somebody, then this person gets an understanding that indeed, yes, a password can be complicated, not the birth date, not something else very obvious. Another rule is very important. We shouldn't have the same password for many websites, many systems. And so it becomes clear that the tools, the security tools that we provide to a citizen, those are not the most complicated ones. They are available. And that's how we can protect ourselves from the majority of attacks that can occur. Another issue. Now we have multiple ID systems, a large number. Just take a look at the clinics, at internet stores, let alone banks. We have a lot of companies with their own ID systems. So what a citizen does? Well, every smartphone has multiple applications with different ID systems. And what is the main thing here? Mobile phone, right? Yes. Also, quite often the passwords for different applications and websites are the same. And if there is a leak from one store, from a clinic, from a fitness center, from a gym, I mean, the data leak can happen. Then that means that the fraudsters will enrich their database of stolen data with because people have the same password for multiple systems. We also have bots on Telegram, we have the internet databases, and we can get any data about any person, basically. And so why does this happen? It happens because, well, ID systems get this identifier. So this ID system, any ID system, has a set of personal data that will allow to identify a person, and they also have some information that can also show the services that a person gets from an organization. Because, well, I don't really want to say this, but under certain circumstances, one can get any information about a person if some data has leaked, let alone the personal life protection, etc. We actually submit this information ourselves, and we give our consent to the processing of this information. At the same time, we don't take care and we don't make this information confidential because of this. We don't use such tools as the two-factor authentication, for example. Another problem is most of the ID systems are based on the most available identifiers. And I believe that an important task here for the state, for the government, for us as the Ministry of Digital Development as well, now it's high time for us to think about the rules and technological solutions. We should have a system, not only IT architecture and IT system, but we should have some system that will allow to protect all the other ID systems from the risk of data theft, of the identifier theft. So there should be some set of rules, maybe infrastructure, that will allow to show an identifier that will be decoupled from a person or from some personal data of a citizen. Simple example. So I've got registered in a system and I got an ID. In that system, I have minimal set of data. Could be like some medical clinic. I'm a patient there. So, and I have my code, and only I have the history in that system, history of my tests. If I need to provide my information somewhere that I've submitted these tests, then I can create another identifier. And, well, it will be attached only to the system that has actually generated this ID, and only this system will be able to recognize it. So we will use multiple identifiers. I guess you've already seen the following. We have popular mobile smartphones, and there is an option to register where one could use an ID. So you are suggested not to actually add your email, your personal email, but it will just be generated. So your email is being generated, and then you register with this email. And if something is needed, if something happens, then the system will first connect to the generated email, and then this generated email box will forward the letter, the email, or some notification to your personal email. That's why we decouple those systems. So we extend the chain, and we are quite concerned about it in a positive way. Like, we're thinking about this. And some time ago, we started to motivate our users with some mandatory measures, because we want to minimize the risks and losses. Because, well, we use multiple apps, applications, and websites, and of course we need to motivate people to use all of this in a more secure way. And we also get some claims from users. Not only banks get those. It's also connected to an access of third parties. Mostly it's about social engineering, when somebody can get some details of a personal life. We would like to exclude those risks. And the approach that is about to create rules and conditions for the technological solutions, we are now analyzing and working this approach over.
We are planning to create a new way of identifying, and the risk that I was telling you about. We need to extract them completely. What is also important, not every ID system has image sort of authentication, and there's no log of sort of like actions, the steps that were used during using this or that application. So that is why it's important for a government as a structure, as an infrastructure, to create new ways of, and this work, of course, will take some time in order not to break down what is already exists on the market, whether it's by the done by the bank or by any other service. We need to see how we can do it in the best way possible. Story that I like to share. One of them, one of the rulings by the president on the 18th of September took place. How to use the application of state services, how to use it at certain sort of like life situations. So whenever you go to certain organization, company, we're wondering how we can use the state services application, Gosuslugi, to sort of prove your ID, prove your age. So whether you go to the museum and, using the Gosuslugi state service app, you can say that, yeah, I'm still under 18 and I can get into the museum for free. So using other state information services, so what we tried to do is sort of like how this particular app can be used in different sort of spheres of life. And I think if we the topic that we talked about, the security, if it's all covered and it's all good and set, then we can expand the way we can use. So, and it doesn't really matter whether it's biometrics or electronic signature or QR code or any other, but having all these tools, how could it be combined, let's say in one app like Gosuslugi, like state service app, and used it as a passport, as an ID, the physical ID that we have to carry every now and then. So, yesterday, some of our colleagues were sharing different ideas that I want to follow up on what Anton was also talking about. I want to support that. So, the way to the client, it's not an easy one, and there are different steps to sort of like form a relationship and to sustain that relationship. But we need to make things, of course, comfortable in this relationship for the client and customer, but also secure. So, some of you colleagues, you're professional in that way, but it is not always possible that this sort of like a way to the client could be reached that supersonically as we all wished, there are times when a client loses interest or he's not informed, and whenever our service has been offered, we need to sort of like present it in the way that will sort of keep the client but not just lose him. So whenever we're talking about the biometric passports, we're talking like all of his data need to be taken right when a person is registering his biometric passport, and because in other ways, nobody would necessarily go out of their way to go back to some office and provide their biometric data again, and there are many times that this will not happen, and we will lose the customer, client, or just a citizen that we want to be useful to. I don't want to scare anyone But in this understanding, the digital identification, it's a great help for the citizen. And developing this or these technologies, there are certain threats that arise. And we do understand how to work with this. And I think the main challenge that we have, at least in my department, in the Ministry of Digital Development, it is to be two steps ahead of the projects and ways that we're creating. Thank you for a very detailed answer, and it's a pleasure to hear that the Ministry of Digital Development is sort of looking ahead, not just ahead, but like two steps ahead. And it's great to sort of like predict the possible challenges, threats, and whatnot. So yes, and we do work on the biometric identifier, and I hope it will take not just the time, but also it will help us to reach that success. Sergey Yurievich, you're a person from business. How do you approach this challenge of the digital identifier and all of this? I think, after all of your sort of like shares, all of this is we're also working on. And there are not so maybe problems in terms of understanding, because we do understand, and the market demands these new things. Yeah, but the reality is that the scammers kind of business is also growing and getting more sophisticated. It's a very interesting phrase. The theory is dry, but the tree of life is getting older and older. And perhaps, it's sort of like can be taken critically against us. But there are certain rules, whether you optimize the process, make it more universal and accessible, it might help. But in the reality is, it could be a bit of a sort of lie. But let us look at ourselves not just as top managers of different organizations, but let us look at ourselves as the clients. We're also clients, and it's not just some binary kind of topic that could be simplified. The simpler it is, the more dangerous it is. Let's not simplify things like that. But in the head of a regular person, regular client, there is a clear connection. And it doesn't have to do only with the financial transactions. It has to do with the personal security, certain moral issues. Like all of us knew that we had to wear a mask during COVID times to protect your life. But so does it mean that all people were wearing masks? No, they didn't. But so why do you think why a person has to follow the rules imposed by the government, by the marketplace and whatnot, if they don't want to? A lot of them don't want to. And that's a challenge. And there are times when a person, in full conscience and being very sort of like easygoing about it, that nothing would happen to him, knowing, and he does know that he's not actually doing the steps that are necessary to protect himself, whether his personal data and whatnot. Just look at yourself, colleagues. How many of you use different kind of passwords for various services? For the most part, you just use the same password for all different websites and whatnot. Maybe our colleagues from the Ministry of Digital Development, he's probably using all different passwords, but for the most part, a lot of us are using the same one, and that's why the business of scammers is growing. Second thing, for us as the organization that is presenting certain services, we do need to simplify that sort of like the way to the client, the way to work with the client. How to keep that balance that we all talk about. Simplifying the way, increasing the conversion of someone who started using certain digital services, who bought a product, who did anything online. It is a very serious topic. So for us in OZON Marketplace, what we did was the following. I might be wrong or maybe very critical, but in the modern world, especially in Russia, and I'm not being ironic about it, but I think Russia is quite ahead of a lot of the countries on the front line in terms of protecting its citizens, whether it's Moscow or the rest of Russia. We are doing what we can. But, what is happening in the modern world where the personal data is being gathered very easily and distributed also very easily. The personal data is something that I think one of the ways is actually to protect it is to make a process to get it more complicated. And if we make this process a little bit more difficult, it might also secure. But for example, right now, at the moment, I can almost for free use this service using the number of someone to get any information possible about this person. What we do in OZON Marketplace, whether it's using, for example, we also have a service providing a password automatically generated. It's not a final solution for all of that, of course. The decrease of conversion, do we fight with that? But what we do is we try to create a way that there will be minimal risks for you to authenticate yourself in order to use our service. And it's not that you have to provide all the information about yourself, but there are several steps to that. And that allows us sort of to neutralize this sort of like risk when all of the information is already available, but it also helps us to fight with fraud. So the self-identification by the client, and there are a lot of risks there. It's hard to protect that. It's easy to hack. Second is consent of the will of the client to use this or that service. And all of us being banks clients, you all know that you have to give your consent. There are certain things, there are certain actions by the client. Our system allows to sort of identify are those actions that have been done by the client, are they being characteristic of that particular client or not? The service is a little bit more complicated, but it does allow us to sort of like to differentiate between the fraudster, scammer, and the real client. So in OZON, whether it's a buyer or a seller on our marketplace, we do provide and try to protect. We do provide security and try to protect. So it's not only about we put emphasis not only on authentication, but also sort of confirming asking for the consent of a buyer or a seller. The reason why I go to Dmitry from the Ministry of Digital Development, it is a threat of all bureaucrats from the ministry to sort of say that the problem is too big. But that problem can be, we know it and we try to find it. But to be honest, the reality, the problem is huge, and doesn't have to deal with how effective the regulators are. But, I mean, the responsibilities that we have as service providers, they are big. The responsibility is huge. But that phenomena of the digitalization of the world with information exchange and how easygoing some of the customers are, that is on the increase. The number of transactions is on increase, but the quantity or numbers, they are on the increase. So.
And so when the transaction is very small, then the user, the customer, isn't really concerned about it. And this is the dialogue that we should lead about the financial security and information security. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, you pointed some negative picture that a user wants to have it simpler, a company wants to make the customer journey simpler, but then a security person comes and starts to discuss all this. Well, of course, nobody says that all of this is simple. We do understand that it's complicated, but just like to sit and rest assured, it's not an option, because we do need to address these issues within our functionality. So we can't stop thinking about this question. We definitely need to address it. And I do agree with you that security requires some efforts. If you want to make something secure, then you need to do something. Change your password, enter some data, just to hope that somebody would come and organize the security or secure environment for you. It's a utopia. So security requires efforts from companies, from service providers, and from customers. I'd like to use this opportunity and pose the question to a representative of the VTB Bank. Do you think that the final authentication of a client should be done by a bank, or a service provider can also do this, some intermediary company? Okay, thank you. I'll be brief, because I would also like to comment on what Sergey mentioned before. So, our end responsibility is actually borne by the company that renders services. So to collect additional info, to get additional info on identification and authentication of a customer, yes, this can be done by a third party. But if something happens, then the bank will bear this responsibility. And in a number of cases, bank should also compensate for the losses that a consumer might sometimes incur. So, what was said before, the AI topic and behavioral analysis of a customer during a session, that's indeed a very right trajectory, because it will allow us to measure the risk, whether a client is indeed the one that we've identified, or is it somebody else? Is the client free of any other will during the operation or not? Well, I guess sometimes, I'm not sure about the law, but sometimes we can prevent a customer from buying something, right? But a bank can't ban a client from some service. For example, if a client of the bank says, I want to transfer money there, and if the customer actually fulfills all the steps that are necessary, then the bank should proceed with the operation, even though if we know that the client is sending this money to droppers, to fraudsters, we really try to convince our client that this is not what they should do. But we are still limited in our capacities, and we have a special service in the central bank that is very strict, and they ask us, why do customers complain that you refuse to render some service? Why some operation was delayed? Why something was frozen on an account? And so we are in between a rock and a hard place here, right? Because on the one hand, we know that this is a fraudulent operation, we understand it, but unfortunately, we don't have enough legal capacity to do this, legal mandate. And so here, I guess what different companies, the central bank and banks do in the field of security patterns. I guess that we've already done some huge work in this respect, but I also believe that we also need to fix the legislation a bit, because there is a story about some opportunities for loans and crediting, etc., because sometimes customers can just transfer everything that they have and even can end up in debt. So we also monitor our customers. We try to have a multi-factor authentication. Biometrics is a nice thing. So we were waiting for this, and now it's fully in full swing. And now we also will be using it with the state biometrics system, because sometimes when the operation goes beyond, some transaction goes beyond some particular sum, then we can ask for some additional authentication for a voice sample, or we ask this person to look into the camera. This adds reliability to our operations, and that decreases the risk of the fraudulent operations. But unfortunately, we're still tied by the fact that if all the steps, security steps, are completed, we shall proceed with the operation. So I guess we need to think about in what cases banks and organizations can stop an operation, even though it is written down in the offering that the bank is due to do this. Thank you very much. Actually, we've discussed it a lot. So, like, to ban person from using their own funds, it's like a fundamental ban. You know that we have a special law in this respect. So it was adopted this summer, but it will come into force next year. We hope that this law will be efficient. So there are no easy solutions, because we can't just block a person from their bank accounts. It's not the right way. That's why we have to have a multi-step system. Why social engineering is so dangerous? Because even if you tell your client that, you know, these are fraudsters, you shouldn't transfer money to them, the customer can still decide that they will do this. Dmitry, you also wanted to add, right? Yes, Sergey commented on my idea, and I would like to respond to his comment. So, in my opinion, it's not correct to think that business and state are addressing the same problem. For example, we have state services, right? We don't sell anything to anybody. We don't have the task to sell anything. We just need to render the service to the person that I have identified, right? That's what you're talking about. I need to make sure that I have rendered the service to the person who has been identified. So I think the follows. One can enter Gosuslugi portal only via two-factor authentication. So we said, yes, you can't access it in any other way, and we also organize the system in such a way. I don't understand that OZON, like a big company, can't introduce these requirements for your users, because you're a big company, you're a business, and you have to be accessible to a person. A person should be able to buy a service or goods from you. But at the same time, saying that we know everything, we see everything, well, that's not true. Maybe you've just heard something like this. Well, the problem of authentication, that's why I don't say that, you know, we will address this problem in this timeline. We can't say that we'll address everything tomorrow, because we also had this story case with the unified biometrics system. We had many other identification systems with other markets. So Fan ID, for example, you remember this, right? So I was also involved in the development of that ID. The story is as follows. I don't say that we'll solve this tomorrow. I don't say that we know everything. I didn't say this. I said that we've identified the issue and we will address it. So I don't believe that here the state is misled or the state understands everything and the state thinks that it will address all the issues only through a legislation. I guess everybody agrees that this is a complex problem, but it still needs to be addressed. So, colleagues, we are running out of time. It's inevitable. I have a short question for you. Can you briefly name a technology from the security point of view that will be critically important for the development of payments in the very short term? Let's start from my side. Yes, so I was listening and I realized that we should strike a balance between technologies and legislation. I guess that we need to use AI more, and the state also pushes us towards it. I mean, we can use it for the analysis of behaviors and choices. Now the biometrics came to the new level, and I guess that this is technology of our future. Sorry, I'll talk about the topics of mine. So the most relevant technology now is the transfer from product certification to process certification, also according to the security requirements, including the cryptographic ones. I would like to say that I guess the first thing here is not the technology. I've listened to a lot of interesting reports, and before that, we participated in FinTrack. It was an educational event, and I also participated in that as a speaker, thanks to the Bank of Russia. I guess now it's now important to invest in something that all the speakers mentioned. This is increasing the financial and digital literacy among citizens. I guess that this will actually return the investment immediately. And also, of course, I support the words of my colleagues when it comes to technologies. I would support the idea about enhancing the financial literacy, digital literacy. I guess it's important. And I will add that the technology to integrate a non-government fintech or private fintech with the government fintech, that's very important. We are also partners of the Ministry of Digital Development when it comes to the communication via State Services Portal. We are a service that protects data, and we also provide access to our users to OZON services. And so, indeed, the state collects a lot of data. The question is about the joint use with the protection of risks. I think it's very relevant. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. So I guess from what you've heard, you've understood that this problem is a multifaceted one and it requires a comprehensive solution. So the speakers mentioned different aspects of this. Colleagues, thank you very much for this discussion. I hope it was interesting, and I would like to wish everybody success in this difficult endeavor, which is to protect the financial services and payments services. Thank you.